Hello everybody, the interview video that you're about to watch with Alan Bennett was conducted to celebrate the launch of the History Boys Educational Edition from Faber and Faber, available in all good bookstores. You can pick up a copy today. I'll put the Amazon link in the description. It contains the complete original text and then detailed analysis of language, structure, form, context, themes written by me. So please do pick up a copy. It's going to really help you with your studies, and enjoy the interview.
Well, I'll tell you, one question a teacher sent me was, if Hector says the point of education is to pass it on, pass it on, boys, and does literature have the same aim? And if so, what would you want to pass on with the History Boys? That's an English teacher question, if ever I've seen one.
Hector would say he'd like to pass on the lines of poetry that they've learned, he says to Timms at one point, says, how can we understand poetry? Most of the things poetry is about haven't happened to us yet. And Hector said, well, I don't understand it. Hector said, I never understand it, but you'll come to understand it. And you'll come to understand it even when you're dying, you'll understand it. I mean, it's a very extreme way of putting it, but he's meaning you'll carry it all through your life if you learn it properly now. That's partly the inspiration in a way, or somebody very like Hector was a master who taught Michael Palin and some of the other. Michael Palin went to Shrewsbury School. And several of the people on private eye did the same. And they were taught by a man called McEachran. And he used to, and like Hector, he didn't have a particular subject, but he had classes which Hector says that they're called general studies, but there's no such thing as general studies. Study is precise, it's accurate, it's about things, it's not, there is no such thing as general studies. But anyway, McEachran had these classes, and he would draw a circle on the floor in chalk, and a chosen boy had to stand in the circle and recite a poem or whatever he'd learned that week. He's of the teaching they all had at Shrewsbury, he's the one that they remember, and they remember the poems that he taught them, and I suppose that's what I mean by passing it on.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book called Spells, which is about all these snatches of poetry that he got the boys to learn. It's just that if you carried away what Irwin taught you, it's a useful thing to have, but it's not a thing to cherish. A way of getting through exams and being eye-catching. It's fine and it's useful, but it's no help in sadness or in crisis or in love, for instance. Whereas the poems that they learnt with Hector, they are a help and a comfort. Which links in slightly to something else Dakin says in a rather contemptuous way, saying, no, all literature is literature of consolation. And Scripps disagrees with him, but at the same time he agrees with it that it is a literature of consolation, but he doesn't think that's a sentiment that you should express. He thinks that's the kind of thing that Irwin would like you to say, but he won't have anything to do with it.
Yeah. And it seems that the Hector, Irwin, the different styles of teaching. I mean, we talked about it earlier, but neither one seems to be the kind of this is the answer. And I think the way that that Irwin in school is talking about, if you want to understand Stalin, look at Henry VIII. And then when he's on TV some years later, he's saying the same thing. It seems like he doesn't sort of grow beyond that kind of approach. And similarly with Hector, who the boys love, and they lap up him hitting them, that kind of thing. They love him, but then so it almost looks like the play is going to be saying, well, Hector's approach is the right one, but then of course he dies, and I think you're left having to make your own decision at the end.
Yes, that's right. Well, and also we see Posner, when Posner is worried about being gay, he goes to see Irwin about it, having divined that Irwin is also gay. And Irwin says to him, well, why didn't you go and see Hector? And Posner says, oh, he'd just have given me some A. Houseman to read. And so there are limits to both approaches, really.
Yeah. The intertextual references, the Houseman and all of the others it's a text that is rich in poetry and film and that kind of thing. What inspired those choices? I know I read 6 poets that you wrote as well, that Houseman, I thought there was some irony in the fact that Hector loves Houseman, and yet so Houseman was in love with a fellow student, wasn't he? And but got married, and almost in that kind of a marriage that wasn't quite real, as it were. And Hector does the same, and then Posner, who it says took in everything Hector says, also takes on some level of kind of pretense, acting as if he's a girl and that kind of thing. I just wondered what inspired the many literary references.
I don't know, I suppose it's because, well, I'm quite old now, so it's a lifetime of reading, really.
Right.
And you do, even my first play, which is now, nearly 50 years ago, I suppose, it's full of stuff I've read, which I fed into the text. And so is this, later on. It's like, it's just like putting raisins in a cake.
Yeah.
And it enriches it, and it feeds into it, and it sets up relationships within the play, between the various parts of it. But the other thing I wanted to say was that although it's not my school at all, the school in the play, there are things in it which happened in my school which are in the play, as for instance, Hector, in the first scene in the second act, he puts his head down on the desk and said, oh, why am I stuck in this godforsaken school? And that happened to me in a French lesson when I was about 14. We had a nice French master who was very, very eccentric, and we must have been particularly obtuse that afternoon, but he suddenly did exactly that, put his head down on the desk and said, why am I teaching this godforsaken place? And it was the first time, I think, that I'd realised that teachers were human, really, which, I think probably boys and girls realised it a bit sooner than I did then, but that came out, and that's, I can't remember the reference, but here it is. One of the hardest things for boys to learn is that a teacher is human. One of the hardest things for a teacher to learn is not to try and tell them.
Yeah.
And I think that's true.
Yeah.
But I think that came really right from when I was 14 years ago.
Amazing. And one of the things I think is quite interesting about the play is the way that chronologically the structure is, different, isn't it? So it starts in the future, goes back, then it's sort of 5 years after the classroom and that sort of thing. And I know that visually, one of the ways to understand that is that Erwin is in the wheelchair, which helps you work out, well, this must be back in time when he's not, that kind of thing. Somebody asked me to say, is there a symbolic meaning to him being disabled?
Well, if there is, it escapes me. I think I saw it as being an intriguing thing, so that the audience finds him in a wheelchair in the opening scene, and this is no references made to it, and so on right through the play until you only find out at the end what. So it's a page turner in a sense. You're waiting to know. The other thing about the play, when it came out in 2004, Spin Doctors, which is what Erwin ends up being, were very much in the news, more so than they are now, with Alistair Campbell particularly being the Tony Blair Spin Doctor. So that made it more contemporary. But it seemed to me that putting on or becoming a television historian was exactly the kind of thing that Erwin would do well, because it's outrageous statements being made and but eye-catching and a bit like David Starkey, but a bit more not so ill-tempered, really.
And for your degree, you did history, didn't you? So there's a great sort of deal of historic knowledge and sort of historic debate in the play. I was wondering how much of that reflects your interest and your studies of history, or was it not like that at all when you were studying the subject, the sort of debate and the sort of contrary view, that kind of thing?
No, the bit that does reflect not so much on what I was taught as what I've become more interested in since is when talking about the dissolution of the monasteries and about Rievaulx and Fountains Abbey, which I've been interested in all my life, really. And so that I'd no need to do research or anything like that, because I just knew it all. And that's a good moment in the film, which doesn't occur in the play, where they're walking through Fountains Abbey, and Erwin is telling them what the various sections of the abbey are, and Dakin just very briefly puts his hand on his shoulder. Oh, you know it all, don't you? And you could see this is a real, and you see Erwin look at his hand, and you can see it's a real moment for both of them. But of course you couldn't do that on the stage. The thing where I think probably I was over romantic probably was, and I may be wrong, but because schools have altered so much since I was at school, but the fact that Posner can be so open about being in love with Dakin is, I think, maybe a romantic notion. I think it probably would be much harder. And indeed, one of the schools we filmed in, they were quite homophobic, some of the boys, because Sam Barnett, who was gay, and Russell Tovey, who was gay, they had fierce arguments with some of the boys who cottoned on to this, and they said it was their school was much nicer than the one that they were actually filming in.
See, that makes me think of quite a complex question, but it seems to me that Posner is very open about who he is. He doesn't mind Dakin knowing that he loves him and admitting he copies his handwriting, and whereas everybody else is very secretive, and Erwin doesn't really admit anything honest about himself. He lies about a lot of things. Hector's living a sort of lie in some ways, and yet, so it almost seems like Posner is very open and honest, and you would think that would lead to a happy life. And a lot of people have said to me, and I wondered the same, and yet the end of his life is so sad. And what was the thinking with that? It's such an interesting.
Well, I suppose I think he was sad because he was fixated on the time at school. I think maybe that's what it was. Not so much the gay side of it as the fact that that was the most vivid period of his life, and so that's why he knows that he remembers everything that happened. If he ever sees anything reference to it in papers, he cuts it out.
Yeah. Okay.
And it remains, the time of his life, as it were. I think, and in that sense, he's doomed to sadness for that.
And I felt all of the characters are multifaceted, and you feel different emotions for all of them except for Headmaster, who, and very similar, I thought, to 40 Years On, where Headmaster was a very similar kind of just out and out. But it adds such a kind of level of hilarity to the play, where you've got this imbecile of a Headmaster, and I know you're a very political person, and I wonder, a lot of people say, well, Headmaster links to Thatcherism and this idea of league tables, and he does speak in that sort of lingo of pull us up the table and that kind of thing. Did you feel that there was a comment to make about the changing attitude to education?
I think what I wanted, I didn't want to write a conventional, rather staid Headmaster, which would be quite easy to do. I wanted to make him slightly shocking, and so to make him foul-mouthed as he was, and a real nasty piece of work, I think. And he was great fun to write, and Clive Morrison, who played the original part, found it great fun to do. But there wasn't anything to do with Thatcherism or anything. It had no more deeper implications than that, really.
Yeah, great. Well, I think we'll finish it there. So thank you so much to Alan Bennett. Hopefully you'll enjoy the video and pick up a copy of the new educational edition of The History Boys in all good bookshops.
And I hope you enjoy doing the play. I'm very happy it's being done for examinations, but I wouldn't like it to be work. I hope you get some of the pleasure out of it that we got out of doing it.